Hello, everyone. So in this video, I'm going to analyze an article that featured in the Hindu. It is titled The Peculiar Case of Ladakh's Eastern Boundary, and it is about the India-China border dispute. Now, students, we all know that India and China, the relations between India and China are strained. And one of the primary reasons for that is the border issue. So students, the line of actual control between the two countries, that is not well defined. That is, that there is no singular consensual understanding on the definition of that line. There's not a clear demarcation of the border, right? And students, we know that in 2020, many, China's soldiers had ingressed on the Indian side. Then last year, there was this whole clash between the armies of the two sides in the Galwan Valley in the Ladakh. So students, this had further strained the relationship between the two countries. Now, students, this article is written in the backdrop of the recent visit of China's foreign minister, Wang Yi. And he met, our foreign affairs minister, S. Jaishankar, and our the national security advisor, Ajit Doval. And one thing that became apparent in this visit was that there is a completely different approach of the two countries towards resolving the border issue. China's stance is that the border issue for now should be kept in the back burner, right? Should not be the focus at the moment. And first, the two countries should try to better their bilateral relations. However, India's stand is that the relations between the two countries cannot get better until the border issue is resolved. So now, students, this article has been written in this backdrop, and the author of this article urges the two countries to find a solution to the border issue. And students, very interestingly, the view that is taken by the author of this article is that India should cede the territory to China, because that is the only way that this solution, we can find a solution to this problem, or this issue can be resolved, right? So let's know more about it. So the author says that there has never been a defined boundary in this area because high watershed frameworks do not apply to the parallel ranges in Ladakh. So students, let me quickly tell you what the watershed framework is. So whenever there is an effort to resolve any border issue or to demarcate the borders, usually the watershed principle is followed. So what is watershed? Watershed is like a high mountain that separates the river system. So if there's a very high mountain and there's a stream of water flowing, the mountain is going to divide that stream into two parts. So it's going to flow on the two sides, basically. And that's how you would, demarcate the border along the lines of that watershed, isn't it? But what happens when there are a number of watersheds? Then students, the principle followed is that the highest watershed or the highest mountain will be taken into consideration. But this whole approach is a little difficult to be followed in Ladakh because of several parallel ranges, right? Now, students, so the author says that this is not possible in case of, Ladakh. And the uninhabited Soda Plains to the east, extending over 100 square miles at height of 17,000 feet, now disputed between India and China, were of no use and not governed by anyone. So this is, here the author is giving you the historical perspective, the historical background of it, that the present day Ladakh was at one time known as Soda Plains. And this was like uninhabited. And therefore, students, this was not governed by anyone because there was nobody like there was no habitation there. So it wasn't governed by anyone. And therefore, Ladakh emerged as a distinct entity with the Treaty of Timosgang in 1684. So it was in 1684 that Ladakh came into being as a distinct province or place, right? Then student, next, the Treaty of Amritsar in 1846 between the East India Company and state of Kashmir included Ladakh with the eastern boundary undefined. So in 1846, when the Treaty of Amritsar was carried out, Ladakh was included in the state of Kashmir, students. However, the eastern boundary of it, the present day disputed region, that was left undefined. Then students, there was this Gazette of Kashmir and Ladakh, and it stated that the boundary with Chinese Tibet is doubtful because that part borders with Tibet, right? So it says that boundary is not clear and it is doubtful. And the unoccupied Aksai Chin is described as neutral territory. So there's this part on the eastern border of Ladakh, which is known as Aksai Chin, right? And this is described as neutral territory, students, that it doesn't belong to any of the two sides. It's like neutral. And it is suitable for wheel transport where the Chinese built their road. So this was like the historical background of the issue and what is the current status. So students, now new domestic consensus. Now there has been advance in developing a common understanding, moving from establishing respective claims to recognizing the ground reality. Now, both the regions have realized that they will have to work towards a solution because both the countries have territorial claims in that region, which are in conflict with each other. So they cannot just continue with making those claims. They will at some point have to find a common ground, a solution to the problem. So this is like a belated realization. So in 1993, students, the signing of an agreement on the maintenance of peace and tranquility along the line of actual control brought in diplomats and dialogue moved from history to principles. So it was in 1993 that the diplomatic discussions and talks started between the two countries. In 2020, students, the focus shifted to the ground situation. And after 15 rounds of talk, the recent joint statement has highlighted continuing the military and diplomatic dialogue and reaching a mutually acceptable resolution of the remaining issues at the earliest for progress in bilateral relations. So in 2020, students, particularly when there was this clash between the armies of the two sides, and there has been increased aggression from the Chinese side, in fact, in the recent past, students. So since then, there seems to be a strong political will around this, that they need to have, regular military and diplomatic dialogues and reach a mutually acceptable resolution. And if you read, it says at the earliest. So students, now here the author says that Karakoram watershed. So we all know, students, that in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, you have this Karakoram range that extends in the Ladakh region as well. So it says that watershed is a defensible border to which the Chinese claim line broadly corresponds, leaving the area where earlier no one exercised control, Aksai Chin, to China. So what it says is that India, please understand this, students, that India has been following the watershed principle to demarcate borders with all its neighboring countries, right? Wherever it is possible, India has been demarcating borders based on the watershed principle that I just told you about. Now, in China's case also, this whole disputed territory in Ladakh, if India follows, or the two countries follow, the Karakoram watershed and takes that as the defensible border, Aksai Chin region, which is the disputed region, and both countries have claims over, that region will go to China, right? So in a way, there's an implied sense here conveyed by the author that Chinese are not wrong in their claims, right? A former foreign secretary and ambassador to China and the US has explained initial decisions as ineptitude and the approach as unrealistic. Okay, so what it says is that there has been, in fact, this, like a view from the foreign secretary of the country also that India's approach is unrealistic. And in the India-China agreement of April 29, 1954, it appears that the reference to passes marking the boundary in the central sector was taken as including the passes in Ladakh, assuming the recognition of the boundary, right? So students, there was this 1954 India-China agreement, right? Wherein they had said, they tried to, mark the boundary. And the confusion arose because it was not clear whether the passes, that means those gaps between the boundaries, who would have claims over that. And at that point, Jawaharlal Nehru was the PM, and the understanding that he had, and the popular understanding at that time by Indian diplomats and officials, was that, that the pass would be included, would come to India, and India recognized this, the most favorable line in eastern Ladakh. But this was unilaterally defined, that this understanding was not that of China, only of India, and that is because the whole confusion arose, right? So students, basically, all in all, the author of this article is taking the view that India, for whatever the confusion was in the past, the one way to solve this problem is that identifying or recognizing Karakoram watershed as the defensible border between the two, which would leave Aksai Chin with China. So, and one major reason for following this watershed principle is that India has been doing that with all the other, neighboring countries in the Himalayan region, right? And unilateral actions in neutral territory, establishing a strategic road and defining the boundary, converted a colonial ambiguity into a dispute, students. So basically it says that this is a colonial ambiguity and this has been turned into a dispute, students. This problem is because of the fact that the Britishers had not resolved this issue before leaving the country. And now there are claims in the neutral territory. So this needs to be resolved. And what it says is that in what would be a bold political step, students, please pay attention, this is very important. In what would be a bold political step from India's side, of course, agreement on the watershed boundary, following a well-established principle that, it would not even look as if India is ceding the boundary to China or has sort of succumbed to China's threat and domination. But it is in line with a principle that India has always followed. So it would be like a safe thing to do. So it says that in what would be a bold political step, India should, cede the territory and follow the watershed principle. And this would meet the national security concerns of India and China without bringing in intractable issues of sovereignty, that it would not be a question on India's sovereignty, that India has succumbed to an outside power. No, it would look as if India is following an, is following an approach that is in line with its a principle that it has always followed, the watershed principle. So students, this is the view of the author, right? We don't know how much of this is true, whether the claims made by him are correct or not, right? And we have not heard of the other side of the story also. But this author says that India should, the only way we can solve this border issue between India and China is by ceding the territory, the Aksai region, to China by following the watershed principle of border demarcation. Now, students, let's quickly understand what line of actual control is. I've been speaking about the line of actual control time and again, and it is like the whole bone of contention or the whole root cause of the problem. that line of actual control is not well defined. So what is line of actual control? So line of actual control, students, it's a demarcation line that separates Indian controlled territory from the Chinese controlled territory. And this LAC is different from the line of control with Pakistan, students, right? So the border between India and China, which is disputed actually, it is known as line of actual control. And the one with Pakistan is line of control, LOC. Now, students, line of control is a very well established, clear, demarcated line, mostly, because this was a product of due negotiations between the two countries, and it was a product of an agreement, students. So students, LOC emerged from the 1948 ceasefire line negotiated by United Nations after Kashmir War. It was designated as the LOC in 1972 following the Shimla Agreement between the two countries, right? And it was delineated on a map signed by Director General of Military Operations. And students, there is an international sanctity of the legal agreement. So LOC is well defined and well recognized. But this is not the case with LAC, students, line of actual control, which in contrast is only a concept. It is not agreed upon by the two countries, neither delineated on a map or demarcated on the ground. So students, therefore, line of actual control is highly contested and not clearly demarcated. And that is why this whole border dispute. Now, students, there are different sectors along the LAC. Now, LAC is like one long line, imaginary line on papers that extends, from the west towards the east between India and China. So it is divided into three sectors, students. The eastern sector, which spans Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim. Then middle sector, Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh, and the western sector in Ladakh, students. So students, eastern and the middle sector of LAC, is like there's a more or less consensus around it. It is well defined, right? The alignment of LAC in the eastern sector is along the 1914 McMahon line. So McMahon line is like well recognized. And the middle sector is the least disputed sector, students. While the western sector, the sector that includes this whole eastern part of J&K, the Ladakh region, it has witnessed high transgressions between the two sides. So this is the disputed part. So there is no clarity on this part of the border. So what are the disagreements, students? India's claim line is different from that of the line of actual control. It is the line seen in the official boundary marked on the maps as released by the Survey of India, including Aksai Chin. So basically, India's claim line is different from the LAC. India has a different claim. India doesn't recognize that, right? And India shows Aksai Chin, the part which is occupied by China, on the Indian side, students, on the map that is released by Survey of India. In China's case, LAC corresponds mostly to its claim line, but in the eastern sector, it claims the entire Arunachal Pradesh and south. So India does not recognize LAC in the western sector, right? But China does. So China does because according to LAC, if we follow the LAC, then Aksai Chin would fall in the China's territory. So therefore, China recognizes LAC in the western sector. But in the eastern sector, India recognizes LAC. India's contention falls in line with the LAC, but China does not. Right? China claims entire Arunachal Pradesh as South. Right? So the claim lines come into question when a discussion on the final international boundaries take place and not when the conversation is about working border LACs. Now, students, border negotiation. So there have been multiple rounds of border negotiations, diplomatic discussions, military talks, and Indian Prime Minister's visit to China in 2003 led to the agreement on appointment of special representatives who would, dedicatedly look into this issue. The aim was a comprehensive solution encompassing all three sectors, and the agreed boundary would follow well-defined geographical features and respect the interest of the settled population. So this was the consensus. However, students, in spite of multiple talks post that, there is no, solution in sight. Now, during Indian Prime Minister's visit to China in May 2015, the proposal to clarify the LAC was rejected by the Chinese. So, Indian Prime Minister, during his visit in 2015, there was this whole proposal that we should clarify the LAC. We should define it. We should resolve the whole issue, but it was rejected by the Chinese. However, in the Wuhan and Mahabalipuram summits 2018 and 2019, both China and India had reaffirmed that they will make efforts to ensure peace and tranquility in the border areas, that even if they're not able to resolve the issue at the earliest, they would at least try to avoid any clashes and maintain peace and tranquility in the region. Next, students, why do face-offs occur? So we know that there is confusion around the border, right? There is not a singular understanding on the issue, but that has been the case for very long. Why have there been more of face-off students in the recent past? And that too in the neutral territory. If both the countries were to just, remain in their part of the territory, right, and leave the neutral territory for now as it is, till the issue is resolved, there wouldn't be any face-offs. So why have been there face-offs? So that is one, because of overlapping claim lines, right? We all know that LAC has never been demarcated. And the boundary in the Sikkim sector is broadly agreed, but not in the western part, students. So here, students, what happens is that patrols, the soldiers, doing the patrolling, they encounter each other. And sometimes, they intentionally or unintentionally, they transgress in the contested zones, right? Beyond the neutral zones as part of the patrolling, students. So that is where these face-offs occur, students, right? So there were protocols agreed in 2005 and 2013 that there are going to be detailed rules of engagement to prevent such incidents, but they have not been adhered to. Now, students, finally, that what are the possible reasons behind increased China's deployment at the LAC? So it has been seen that in the recent past, in the line of actual control, there has been increased military deployment by China or increased military aggression by China. So what are the reasons for this, students? Why? So number one, India's decision to strengthen its border infrastructure. So students, we all know that under the present government, India also has become assertive, stronger, its economy, its geopolitical status, its international recognition, international status, students. India is seen as a major emerging power, which is very evident from the recent Russia-Ukraine issue, where different countries, want India to be on its side. So India's military power is strengthening, its economic power, its geopolitical status. So students, India has been more assertive under the present government, and it is strengthening its border infrastructure, which is seen as China as a threat to it. So China seems to be threatened by it and maybe expects India to make the next logical move of probably enhancing its claims in the contested regions, right? So that is one reason. One reason as to why there is increased China's deployment at the LAC. Next, students, India's United States tilt and US-China tensions. So students, we know that in the past few years, India's relationship with US has bettered, has, sort of strengthened. US recognizes India as its strategic partner. India has recently been made part of the Quad grouping, right, which China sees as anti-China in nature and a group made to sort of contain China from growing. And we all know, students, that China has strained relationships with both US and India. So China sees, so it could be two ways. One, China is doing this as a in retaliation to India's, closeness to US, and maybe also that it wants to sort of threaten India, right? To send that unsaid message, implied message, that if you were to move close to any of the Western powers, particularly US, right, and get, especially not just getting closer, but getting into groupings that are anti-China in nature, you will have to face the heat on the borders. Next, students, China's view India's assertion regarding Gilgit-Baltistan as an implicit attack on China-Pakistan economic corridor. So students, there's this whole China-Pakistan economic corridor that China is working upon. It is China's flagship program. And it is building this economic corridor between China and Pakistan, and it moves through the Gilgit-Baltistan region. Now, Gilgit-Baltistan region, students, India lays claim over this territory. This is in the Pakistani side. And India lays claim, territorial claims on this region, because at some point, this region was part of Jammu and Kashmir region, integral part of Jammu and Kashmir region. So India regards this as part of India. So now because China has already made investment in this region, China views India's assertion regarding Gilgit-Baltistan as a direct attack on China's flagship program. That means India is doing it to obstruct the progress of this economic corridor. Next, students, China's growing assertiveness over the South China Sea. So, we all know that in the South China Sea, China is getting really aggressive. China has, is getting into multiple conflicts with various regions over territorial claims on over different island, students. So China's assertiveness on this part of the world, in the, this Western Ladakh region, this seems to be, an extension of that assertiveness. So that means it is not doing particularly with India, but that has been China's policy in the recent past, in the stance that China has taken, wherein it is growing very assertive and making military claims, territorial claims over, parts of different countries. Then political and economic tensions within China due to COVID-19 pandemic. So there is a lot of political and economic tension, students. So that could be another reason why it has increased aggression on this part of the country. And India being a growing power in Asian region, right? So given this is just to sort of, in a way, like contain India's growth, to obstruct India's growth, that nobody can deny that India is, soon emerging as one of the strong countries. India already is a very strong country, but it's getting stronger by the day. And there's an international recognition of that, both politically, economically, in terms of military, right? And it is to contain this, India's growth, that China has increased its aggression in the Ladakh region, right? So that's all for this video, students. I will see you very soon with another video. Thank you so much.